It is. We are coming into the Easter season, and we are looking at. I'm going to look at a little bit of the story. I've been wanting to preach this message for a while, and today's message is going to be a little bit different. In fact, it's going to be a lot different than some messages that I preach. I want to start. Not with a scripture today, but I want to start with something in our culture. Now I'm going to preach. Sometimes you start with scripture and preach from the scripture. Other times you preach up to the scripture for a little while. So today we're going to preach up to it for a little bit, okay? I think that there are two different ways of grasping truth in our culture. One is called propositional truth. Okay, propositional truth is logic. Everybody say logic. Here's what I'm talking about. Have you ever seen those diagrams? Like they're called a Venn diagram, where they'll draw a circle and they'll call it A, and they'll draw a smaller circle inside it and they'll call it B. And then they ask you in school. Do you remember doing these? Well, they'll put a dot inside B, and they'll say if all B is A, then is this dot, is this point, is it A and B or A and C? They'll ask you all these logical questions. And all B is A, point C is in B, therefore point C is also in A. Am I making sense? That's like, some people are like, what? Because some people, logic and propositional style truth doesn't really, it's like, that's not my thing, I can't connect with that, I just don't understand. There are ways of knowing things. Now, if I translate that over into real life, I could say the universe exists with order and beauty. Order and beauty only comes from a designer. Therefore, the universe had a designer. Does that make sense? Is that logical, right? So what I'm doing is I'm translating it into some kind of more real life sort of, and there's value in that. There's value in this kind of logical proving that there's a God, proving and demonstrating that Christianity is a reasonable religion. There's value in that. But there's another way that we tend to share and find and believe truth in our culture, really in all cultures, and that is stories. We tend to value and receive and learn truth through stories. Now, this series, I'm calling it His Story. If you're tracking with me, that's a play on words of history, yes, because I believe history is just the story that God is telling. God is the master storyteller, and you are part of His story. The problem is that sometimes we have a really difficult time plugging into and figuring out where we fit in the story God is telling. It's okay. We've got a kid who's lost mommy and trying to figure it out, and it's all right. No problem. So, oh, no, now she's running from mommy. Right? It's okay. Don't you love kids? I love all the kids we have in our church. It's fantastic. I put most of them there, I think, I'm afraid. So I set 7 of them anyway. So yeah. All right. Yes. Thank you for those prayers. I appreciate that. All right. Finding your place in the story that God is telling. You ever jump in the middle of a story and you didn't get to hear the first part? Like you come walking into a room in the middle of a movie or in the middle of somebody telling a story, and the punchline of the joke comes and you don't get it at all because you're trying to figure out I missed something, right? I missed something. I don't know what happened, but there were some details that slipped by me somewhere because it just doesn't seem to make sense. If you don't know the story that God is telling, it could be that you might never find your place. Now, if you went into a movie store or a bookstore, or you went onto Netflix or something, and you scrolled through and you saw all those stories, or you walked through and you saw all those books, or you went to one of those, what's that used bookstore down here, half-price books, and you looked at all those books and all those man, I promise somebody must write like 2 or 3 of those little romance novels every single day, because it's just ridiculous. Like, who even has time to read all these things? But when you look at all of that and you see those stories, has it ever occurred to you that the way we pass on values and truth and things is in story form? Out of all those thousands of stories, though, here's my thing today. I'm going to boil it down. I want to tell you that there's really only 7 stories in the world. There's only 7. All right. Now, some of you are like, nah, you're trying to find number 8 before the day's over. That's fine. All right. But now, I want to tell you there's only 7 stories in the world. Everything else is just all the stories that you hear, all the movies that have ever been made, all the books ever written, are all some version, some mashup of these 7 stories. Okay? 7 basic stories in the whole world. All right? I'm gonna run through these this morning. Here's the 7 stories. Number 1, overcoming the monster. Overcoming the monster. What that is there's an evil that must be conquered. Okay? There's something threatens the homeland, and it's got to be defeated. Right? It's you could come up with all kinds. You could probably come up. Anybody want to shout out some names? So what's a story that fits that one? Anybody? Frankenstein. All right. Somebody else said something I couldn't hear. Okay. Harry Potter. Okay. All right. King Kong, Godzilla. Okay. How about the Magnificent Seven, or the Magnificent Seven, or Star Wars? Right. There's a great evil that must be defeated. Number 2, rags to riches. Rags to riches. The rags to riches story. There's a humble beginnings, but through ingenuity and hard work and a certain amount of luck, somebody climbs and becomes something. The Hobby Lobby story. Okay, yeah. Yeah, what's David Green worth now? $4 billion? I think that's probably it. Started in his garage. That's true. Dave Ramsey started on a card table in his living room. That was, yeah. The rags to riches story. Any ideas, any stories about that? Any others? Apple. Yeah, Apple computer, right? And you get Steve Jobs. And corporations, by the way, tell stories too, right? Companies, brands tell stories. So the Apple brand tells a story. They tell about, yeah, absolutely. Dell computer. IBM. Yeah. McDonald's. What about, anybody ever heard of the Pursuit of Happiness, the novel about, true story about the guy who was wanted to be a stock trader, was a salesman, and was failing, and wanted to be a stock trader, and did an unpaid internship, and wound up succeeding in the process of doing the unpaid internship to chase his dream. He was homeless and slept in public restrooms and all. It was a very interesting story, rags to riches. What about The Quest? The Quest. I used a different font. I don't know if you can read that. Something of value is lost, or some place must be reached. Something must be done. What's that? Yeah. Okay. Was it? The Hobbit. Okay. All right. Yeah. Good. Lord of the Rings. The Hobbit. What's that? Camelot. Okay. All right. What about Indiana Jones? The Indiana Jones. Oh, something of value is lost. You got to go find it, right? Lord of the Rings, that sort of thing. There's a quest that must be accomplished. The next one, voyage and return. Voyage and return. There's different ways you could look at it. There's a journey must be taken, and the hero will come back, but on the journey he's been changed forever. He'll never be the same, and he has to travel and come back. Voyage and return. Maybe it's The Hobbit in this case. The Hobbit. It's really not so much just about conquering the dragon as it is about. I just read my kids The Hobbit recently, and Bilbo's never quite the same. He comes back. He's changed, and the growth of the hero along the way. Comedies. I'm sorry. Did I miss? Let's go back. Okay, there you go. Back to the Future. Okay, all right, Back to the Future. That sort of voyage and return. So there's a journey that has to be taken, and the hero is changed forever. Nothing is quite the same. What about comedies? Now, comedy has become a different word for a genre, But really, it's a style of story, not primarily something that means something funny. It means a style of story that where there's an initial conflict and there's two people that can't be together for some reason, and then they struggle through things, and things get funny, and things get awkward, and then they get it all worked out, and it usually winds up okay at the end. Things like You've Got Mail, or almost anything else with Meg Ryan and Tom Hanks, or or A Midsummer Night's Dream if you're classical and you like Shakespeare, that's that sort of thing. There's one other kind of turn that a story can take, and that is a tragedy story. The tragedy story is the villain gets his just due in the end. Somebody makes the journey and they gradually slide downward, and they make a mistake and they make a wrong turn and they slide downward, and it doesn't end well. For that sort of thing, you're thinking of things like Macbeth or The Godfather, or some story like that. Or what's that? Fury. Okay, yeah. Some terrible mistake is made, and so the villain gets his in the end. Number 7 story is rebirth. Rebirth is like a tragedy, except that on the journey downward, something happens, and just before it's too late, the hero or the villain changes his ways. Anybody think of anything like that? Okay, Last Samurai, I don't know. Some of these I've never seen or whatever. I know they're classic stories in our culture. What Despicable Me. Okay, so Despicable You. The rebirth. What about A Christmas Carol, or Darth Vader's story arc in Star Wars, or A Christmas Carol? He's on his way down, Ebenezer Scrooge, but something happens and brings him back. And the end of the story, he's reborn. Merry Christmas and God bless us everyone, right? You get these kind of stories. It's a Wonderful Life, right? It's on its way down to tragedy, and then he realizes, oh, look what my life is. It could have been different. And another Christmas one there, yeah. What about, or The Grinch? There you go. All right. Here's what I want to say. All of these stories, why do these stories resonate? Why do they connect with us? Why do they connect on an emotional level? Why do we remember them and value them and bring them back? I want to suggest to you that the reason all of these kinds of stories connect, and the reason why at the end of the book you can hardly put it down. At the end of the book you're just like, oh, they did get together after all. Or at the end of the book you're like, yeah, it's about time he got what was coming to him. The reason all of those stories resonate is because I think all of the stories we tell are connected in some way to the story that God is telling. All of these stories, in some measure, they resonate. Now, they imperfectly reflect the story that God is telling. They don't connect perfectly, they don't line up directly. But in some measure, we love the hero because there is a hero. In some measure, we love the rebirth because we want to believe there can be a rebirth in my own life. We love the story of the quest and the journey because we want to believe that there's purpose and meaning out there in life, and that this journey we're on through life is not pointless, that we're looking for something and we're going to find it. We want to believe that. We connect with stories like Rags to Riches because we want to believe that things are going to improve. Like even maybe my story with hard work and persistence and some help from up above, maybe I can get where I'm going and things are going to improve. We want to believe that even though there's lots of conflict right now and things don't seem to make sense, we want to believe that in a sense life is comedy that's going to turn out all right at the end. Now, some of these get all mixed up together, and you've got multiple. You say, well, this one could be this one, or it could be that one. And here's what I want to say. I think that all of these 7 stories are woven into the fabric of the universe, and they are part of the story that God is telling. I want to just tell you this real quick, and I want you to hear this story. I'm going to tell it in a little sketch form. Ready? A young hero feels a call to be something more. And he meets an old, wise mentor who helps him overcome his fear and conquer the villain and fulfill his destiny. What's that story? Okay, somebody said Star Wars. Anybody else? What is it? I don't know. I'm not sure I know that one. What? It could be. Could be, I guess. Here's what I'm saying. That right there could be like 50 different stories, couldn't it? Watch, here we go. Ready? All right, I'm just going to read it off my paper. Ready? A young hero feels a call to be something more and meets a wise old mentor who helps him overcome his fear, conquer the enemy, and reach his destiny. Let's do it again. A young hero feels a call to be something more, and he meets an old wise mentor who helps him overcome his fear, conquer the enemy, and reach his destiny. Let's do it one more time. A young hero feels a call to be something more, who meets an old wise mentor who helps him overcome his fear, conquer the enemy, and reach his destiny. I could do the same. I could do that with like so many different things. Now, I wonder why these kind of stories, why do they connect? What if God is writing a story for you and He's calling you to be something more, and He wants you to connect with Him who can teach you the way, the one who knows the way, because there's one who's walked this way before you got here. And what if He wants you to help you conquer your sin and self and fear and defeat the enemy that fights against you every single day and reach the destiny as the gates swing open and you walk into heaven? Maybe that's why these stories are meaningful. Maybe it's not because of that hero. Maybe it's because of that hero. Maybe it's not because of those evils. It's because you and I know, we know in our gut there is an evil we face every single day. And some of it's out there and some of it's in here. Sometimes it's others pushing in on, and sometimes I face it right here. But either way, we've got to look up and say, I need help. I can't do this on my own. I need you. And, you see, if you're taking notes, God has a story that He's telling. The rest of these are not going to be on the screen. I'm just going to pull them off your handout, all right? Genesis chapter 2, verse 4. This is the account of the heavens and the earth when they were created, and when the Lord God made the earth and the heavens. Now, when He says this is the account, what's he saying? It's the story. It's the story. In fact, 13 more times in the book of Genesis it says, and this is the account of, and it launches into the next part of the story. And then, story after story after story, and He strings them together. Do you find it interesting at all that God mostly communicates who He is in stories? Instead of just saying, God does say this, but instead of just saying, I am powerful, He says, let me tell you about a group of people that was stuck between an army and the Red Sea. And let me tell you about at the last moment when hope was gone, let me tell you about how a man raised up a rod, and let me tell you about a God who blew on the water and brought His people through. So instead of just saying, I know best, instead God says, let me tell you about a man and a woman named Adam and Eve, who doubted that I knew best and listened to somebody who told them that I didn't know best. And let me tell you a story about what happened next. About an apple and a serpent and a tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Let me tell you a story about a man that should have defended his wife when the devil and the evil deceiver came calling, But he didn't. Instead, they shared the fruit. And here's where we are today. You see, God has a story that He's telling. And you and I have to find the part we play. And you got to know the story. You got to love and value the book that includes the stories, and love it and grind it down into the cracks of your heart, or you won't know the part you're playing. And you'll be in the middle of the story and saying, why did this happen? Why did that happen? I don't understand how this... The author of this story this is pointless. One time, one of Shakespeare's characters, long ago, centuries ago, one of Shakespeare's characters said this. He said, life is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, but signifying nothing. What's he saying? He's saying life is crazy, awful, but it's meaningless in the end, and then we die. That's what he's saying. Now, there's a guy who didn't understand the story that really was going on all around him. What if you don't know the story, then at some point you climb the ladder you think is success, only to find it's leaning against the wrong wall. You fight to climb and you fight to make progress, and then you realize that wasn't what I thought it was. And the world is full of people just like that. Robin Williams took his life, drank himself to death, took medication until he died. A man who was considered by so many to be one of the funniest men, just hilarious, and a comedian and an actor that brought laughter to so many, but he took his own life. Freddie Prinze, the great clown and comedian of years gone by, at the height of his career, took his own life, and he said, he left a note that said, I can't hear them laughing anymore. What's he saying? Their laughter no longer gives me meaning. Life isn't making sense anymore. The story doesn't make any sense. What if the story God is telling, what if it's got you in it, and every single detail and every positive thing that ever happened to you, every negative thing that ever happened to you, every single detail of your life, what if it's just a part of the big story? And if you understand the story that's being told, then the details start to make sense. God has a story that He's telling. The next thing I want to tell you is this, that you're not the hero. You're not the hero. Oh, man, now you blew it, Darrell. I wanted to be the hero of the story. Well, let me tell you, Luke 1:1, many have undertaken to draw up an account of the things that have been fulfilled of us. What's he saying? A lot of people wrote down the story. They wrote down stories of these things, Luke is saying. Just as they were handed down to us by those who from the first were eyewitnesses and servants of the word. Therefore, since I myself have carefully investigated everything from the beginning, it seemed good also to me to write an orderly account for you, most excellent Theophilus. And so begins the book of Luke, the Gospel of Luke, where he tells the story of Jesus. Now, I have to tell you that if you believe that your story, the story of your life, most people wind up falling into one of two categories when they start telling their story. They believe either that they are the victim or they're the hero. They believe that they're either the victim or they're the hero. You think about it. How many times have you heard people say, I just can't, if you knew what they did to me. Well, when I was 9, and sometimes I'm not trying to make fun, sometimes these are deep, painful stories. I have sat across from people as they cried and wept and trembled and told me stories of abuse and sexual abuse and difficulty and anger and family members and friends. I have sat and wept with people as they told me their story. Yesterday, somebody came by the church and they said, I don't understand, in the course of our conversation, they said, I don't understand how this could happen, how this could happen, how God could allow these things to happen. Well, if you think that you're the hero or the victim, then all of those things won't make any sense sometimes. Because I guess there's no point. I guess there's no point. There's no meaning to this. There's no happy ending. Why? Because I'm the victim and my life is a tragedy. Right? Or, if you've ever met people like this, there's not quite so many of them on the south side, but if you meet people like this, they are a self-made man. And they have climbed, and they have fought, and they have sometimes lied and cheated and stolen, and they have arrived at the pinnacle. And poor you, if only you could understand how amazing my story is, you would know how heroic I am, right? You ever met that person? How many of you met that person, right? Yeah. People tend to think they're the hero of their story or they're the victim. But listen to me real good here. If you think that you're the victim of your story, if you think that you're the victim, then you just feel like you're in that part and you're out of control. There's nothing you can do. This is the hand I've been dealt. This is the script I've been given. I just have to read what I've been given, and you get to be the victim for the rest of your life. Or if you feel like you're the hero, then you get to be arrogant and proud and think, I'm writing my own story. I'm pulling myself up by my own bootstraps. I'm in charge of this. But what if you're not the hero or the victim? What if Jesus is truly the victim? He didn't deserve what happened to him. And you didn't either, perhaps. Perhaps you were badly hurt and badly wounded. What if Jesus knows how you feel because he's the true victim of the story? But if you feel like, well, I wish I could climb on top of being the victim and I could become the hero, what if Jesus is the actual hero? You see, if Jesus is the hero, I don't have to be proud. And if Jesus is the victim, I don't have to be hopeless. If Jesus is the hero, I can be humble and thankful and glad. Because Jesus is changing me and is rescuing me and is transforming me and is giving me meaning even in the middle of pain and difficulty and trials. And if I am not the victim, if Jesus is the victim, then I get to say, oh, what grace. Behold, what kind of love the Father has given to us. I usually find that people struggling with addiction are telling themselves a story where they are the victim in some sense. People who struggle with the chains of addiction generally are telling themselves a victim story. They have the story and they're the victim. This happened to me. I lost that. This happened to me. That happened. This happened. And they tell, and the story they tell. Instead, what if they turned and said, you know what? The truth is Jesus is the victim and the hero, and He set me free. And all this happened to me, but I compared to Jesus, it's nothing at all. I'm just thankful that He's changing me, He's setting me free. He gets to be the hero and the victim of the story. Some of the stories that the world tells, if you're taking notes, some of the stories the world tells are lies. Now this is important for you to know. Some of the stories the world tells are lies. They will tell all of you teenagers a story. In fact, I am a cultural observer. I like to sit back and watch culture and notice things. You know the point of every Disney movie ever? The point of every Disney story ever, just about, is believe in yourself. Trust your heart. Isn't it? Did you know the point? They asked one time, they asked Anton LaVey, the writer, the author of the Satanic Bible, they asked him, what is the core philosophy of Satanism? And he said, do what you want. He said, technically he said, do what thou wilt. You'll see sometimes, once in a while, you'll see somebody wearing a shirt in our culture that way. Do what thou wilt. Anybody ever seen that? A while back, I don't remember the guy, Jay-Z, I think it was wearing one a while back, kind of made the news. Do what thou wilt. What he's saying is, I subscribe to the basic philosophy. But you know what? It's not that far off. If you listen carefully, it's not that far off from what they're teaching kids in the kids' stories today. Is it? It's not trust your authority figures, depend on them. It's not trust God. It is trust yourself and do what you feel like is right. Do what you want. Ultimately, you've got to be the captain. You can't live anybody else's dream. You got to live your dream. It's all variations on do what you want, isn't it? It's astounding when you look at it and think about it in that kind of way, rather than do what God wants, trust Him, trust yourself and do what you want is the message that the culture tells. In fact, Matthew 28:15, so the soldiers took the money and did as they were instructed. You know, this is a part of the story of Jesus where He was crucified and He was placed in a tomb. On the third day, He came out of the tomb alive. And they came to Him and said, listen, we can't let they came to the soldiers and they said, listen, we can't let this story get out. We're going to pay you a bribe. Everywhere you go, when they ask you what happened, tell them His disciples came and stole the body. And it says that this story, that the disciples stole the body, has been widely circulated among the Jews to this very day. Some of the stories the world tells are just lies. They're just lies. You teenagers, they're going to tell you, don't listen to your parents, listen to your heart. No, really, that's what they'll tell you. They'll tell you, if you don't believe me, next time you're sitting down with the kids, anything, teens, anything, preteens, anything, check it out and see if the message isn't, don't listen mainly to authority, listen to your heart. Because the authority, the system will tell you, and your parents will tell you, you can't, but if you'll just listen to your heart, it'll all turn out well in the end. Sometimes even the adults in the stories come around and realize the kids were right in the first place. Have you seen this? It's astounding. The adults come around and realize the kids were right in the first place. Yeah, because that always works out well, right? That always ends well. No, let me tell you, guys, some of the stories that the world is telling are lies, and this is why the Apostle John said, do not love the world or the things in the world. Instead, he said, you got to love God. You got to love Jesus. You got to recognize when the story they're telling doesn't line up with the story that God is telling. In fact, Genesis chapter 3, verse 4, Satan tells a story about God. You ready? You will not surely die, the serpent said to the woman, for God knows that when you eat of this fruit, your eyes will be opened and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. The devil's telling an alternate story. I just like to replace the true story with one that's just a little different, And that's the way he works. Some of you men, the devil will tell you, he'll tell you this story. He'll say, your wife is, you're actually right. You should just stand firm. Show her who's boss. Ladies, the devil will tell you, the devil will come in and he'll tell you an alternate story about your husband. And he'll tell you, you know what? I get this one all the time. I see this one all the time between couples on Facebook. He's cheating. Sometimes it's true. Sometimes it is. But I will tell you this, that whatever the doubt is, sometimes the devil's telling you a false story, a false narrative to make you divided and push you away and make you angry and make you... And if he can raise up resentment and frustration and anger using a false story, he'll do it. He will. Some of the stories the world is telling are lies. Right now there's a popular narrative that basically says this, that the secret of life, is to become, aware of the universe and your surroundings. It's coming in from the east, from the Eastern world. It's kind of a mystical, it's that the world is all, it's like the world is full. There's not necessarily a personal God. It's just that there is a God force out there, and whatever you'd like it to be, that's what it is. And you just kind of, it's very popular right now. Spiritual but not religious. Spiritual but not Christian. Very popular right now. If you don't believe me, go look in the bookstore and look what they put on the end caps. Look what they feature. But you know what? It's a lie. There is a God. There is the true and living God whose name is Jesus. And He came into this world to save you and me from our sin because we had sinned against a holy, righteous God who has a right to expect of us obedience and rightness. He has a right to expect out of us holiness. And we sinned and walked away and shook our little fist in His face. And Jesus came into this world to save sinners, to break the chains of sin, to change the hearts of people and raise us up and make us like Jesus Himself, to save us when we could not save ourselves. And He is the hero. And someday, if you're taking notes, someday you'll tell your story to God. The true story. Not the one you tell yourself, but the true story. Some of you, I got to tell you this, I'm going to maybe talk about this a little bit more in the future in this series. But some of you lie to yourself. The stories you tell to yourself are lies. Now you're thinking, oh dear, that's what stories am I telling you? Sometimes the stories you tell yourself are lies. You tell yourself stories like, I'm not worth anything. But if Jesus came to die for you, you're worth everything. Some of you are telling yourself stories, I'll never be able to change. Oh, but have you read the story God is telling? When He said in Ephesians chapter 2 that this same power that raised Christ from the dead is at work in you? Have you read the story that He's telling? Some of you tell yourself the story, this is just who I am. But have you read the story that God is telling, where He says, I'm going to make you who I made you to be? Oh, some of you are telling yourself stories that says that's no big deal, everybody does it. Oh, but have you read the story of Jesus who paid the price for that thing that everybody does? Some people are saying God never saw it. You're telling yourself stories nobody knows. But I'm here to tell you, have you read the story where God said, I saw. I see everything. I never missed a thing. In fact, in Hebrews chapter 4:13, nothing in all creation is hidden from God's sight. Everything is uncovered and laid bare before the eyes of Him, look at this, to whom we must give an account. Someday, you will tell your story. Someday, you will stand before God and you will say, here's what happened. And before the eyes of Him who saw all of it. See, you can fake a story for a while to other people. We might miss it. I might not know. I might not know what's going on in your life. I might not know. Your wife might not know. Your kids might not know. Your husband might not know. Nobody in this church might know. But God knows. And someday, you'll tell the story. And you'll stand before God. And if that frightens you, then let me tell you about a Jesus who came to die. You see, if I had to tell everybody here my story, and if I had to put mine into a story and we all watched it replay out, I'd be horribly ashamed. If we had to rewind and go through Darrell's story today and watch every moment as it really happened, there are parts of it I would want to say, no, please don't look at that part. Please don't look at that part. But you see, I'm not the hero of my story, and I'm not the victim of my story either. The truth is that one has come into my heart and my life, and it's okay that he sees everything. You see, he also sees the one who died for me. And he also sees the blood that was shed for me, and he sees the day where Jesus came into my life and forgave me and broke the chains of sin, and he is in the process of making me who he wants me to be. And if you're scared to go stand before God and tell your story, maybe it's because you haven't realized that the story that's going to be told, maybe your story needs to run into Jesus' story. And when that happens, we call it salvation. We call it being saved. We call it being transformed. We call it repentance for sin and faith in Jesus. We call it being born again, born into the family of God. And if you will see that, if you'll see that moment and you can come to that moment and say, I'm not the hero. Jesus is the hero. He's forgiven me. And look what he's doing in my life. Then you will have a story to tell to everybody. You'll have a story worth telling to everybody. And you won't have to worry about the dark parts of your story and the ashamed parts of your story. Because the truth is that those parts of the story, you know as well as I do, that the dark moments in the story only make it better when the light breaks through and the door gets kicked open and the hero walks in. And the dark parts of your story don't have to shame you and make you afraid any longer if you know that there's a moment when the hero has kicked in the door of your story and he stands there and said, Father, I died to save that sinner. And when that happens in your story, it changes everything. And all of a sudden your story is one that honors God and not shame. It doesn't have to shame anybody because you're not the hero and you're not the victim. Jesus is. Would you bow your heads with me for a moment for prayer?